Hey guys, what's up? It is Ripe again, back with more revenge stories. If you haven't already, please don't forget to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube for exclusive Reddit content. Without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled, Greedy Landlord Tries to Intimidate Me and Insists I Must Pay for House Upgrades. My family and I had been staying in a townhouse duplex for about 7 years and had enjoyed a pretty good relationship with the other residents, trustees and the landlord, who will be called R from henceforth. When we first moved in, we dealt with R via a letting agent who did a pretty lousy job on both ends of the deal. Statements were always late, they hardly communicated anything between R and myself, and were just mooching their commission by providing zero service to either of us. Going into the third year, R and I decided to just deal with each other directly, fire the letting agent and have a generic lease drawn up. Fine, everything was going great. Upon termination of the letting agent's services, they sent one of their employees to our place to do an outgoing inspection, which both R and I thought was silly, as he was more than happy with the state of the place. We'd make sure the garden was in a better shape than when we moved in. I had done all kinds of minor repairs to the place and generally strive to be a great tenant, because at the end of the day, while it isn't my house, it is still my home. This outgoing inspection was done in a few minutes. R and I signed his form acknowledging all was in order, and the agent beat a hasty retreat. I didn't know until a few years later though how important this moment was. Now all the while, the R and I had a verbal agreement that I would get first dibs on the place should he wish to sell. My wife and I kept close tabs on what other units in the complex were sold and bought for, so that we could later enter into negotiations armed with facts. Until the poo later hit the fan, the only downside we had ever experienced from living in the complex was that one or two members of the trustees were rather grumpy old folks, particularly the head, who shall now be called Jay. Jay had tried to pass some rather stupid new policies in the complex, such as banning kids from playing in the common gardens. She is a grumpy old spinster who rules her little kingdom with an iron fist, and she is also a significant character in this long-winded story. Getting back to R, we were always on good terms. He had a friend or two still living in the complex and would occasionally visit them, and if I saw his car or bike outside, I would invite him over for coffee. He had bought that place we were living in as a retirement place, but his wife had grown too frail for the stairs, so he bought a house down the road and kept the unit as a rental investment. Fast forward to our last year there, he suddenly put us onto short-term leases in case we decided to leave sooner, and kept nudging me about our agreement to offer to purchase. We set a date for an actual discussion on the matter, as well as informing him that we would be leaving at the end of our current lease, which still had about 5 months on it. He then came around for our discussion, which we both agreed was just an initial negotiation and that no figures or terms discussed there were final. He really didn't like what I had to say, and the figures in his head were way inflated over the market value that my wife and I had seen in terms of other units in the area, most of which had been revamped to a much more modern state than the one we were living in. We agreed to disagree and set an actual negotiation date. The date came, I put in an offer, and he freaked out. The thing is, not only was my offer perfectly in line with what other units had sold, but because we would be doing a direct deal without an agent, he would be saving a whack of money in agent commission. He was not hearing any of it. Within a week he popped around to come check the place out because he wanted to take measurements for the stair lift he wanted to install. The staircase was way too narrow for that, so I knew something was up. Turns out he was doing a preliminary outgoing inspection, something which I later found out was not entirely legal. During the course of our stay, we had, with his permission, painted the entrance hall. After doing so, he had come over to approve it and complimented my wife on the job. It was a different color to the rest of the house, and my wife had done a great job of making sure it was a professional job. R had now decided that it was a problem and would devalue the entire property and lower the marketability. Not only that, but he then claimed that the color that the rest of the interior of the house was more than likely no longer available, so we would have to repaint everything, and he then went out into the garden and told me that the lawn looked terrible. The area I live in is experiencing the worst drought in centuries. Water was strictly rationed and the price of it was skyrocketing. Watering a garden with municipal water was heavily frowned upon back then and is currently completely illegal. Every other garden in the complex had brown grass, as well as every house in the neighborhood. He told me that I would have to pay to have his entire lawn replaced. Next, he went outside to where my wife's car was parked and told me that the brick paved area was not officially a parking spot and that the settling in the bricks by where each wheel was would result in us having to pay for the entire area to be repaved. It looked like that when we got there, and he walked past my wife's car dozens of times during his visits and never said a word. Also, the trustees, particularly Jay, were the most efficient mob in the world in letting you know within microseconds of a transgression of the complex rules, both in the form of a polite knock on the door and by a letter slipped into your mailbox. If that was an issue, there is no way they would have let that slide for 7 years ever. So I tried my best to reason with R, but he was not having any of it. He was a retired manager of whatever business he worked for and was used to just shouting people down. He tried this with me and found, to his horror, that I respond in kind. Within a couple of weeks, I had an attorney's letter in my inbox stating that I was liable for everything and that it would come out of my rental deposit. Here is where the fun begins. I got hold of a friend in the legal game, she put me onto a couple of other legal minds, and I eventually ended up with who I wanted to chat to, an absolute pitbull of a litigation firm. I had since chatted to my local rental tribunal and confirmed that the driveway issue was part of the common ground area, and that seeing as I had photographs showing other cars of other units parking there and had no correspondence in any way, shape or form informing me that it was a problem and he had no leg to stand on. I forwarded the law firm all of the strongly worded emails he had sent me, photographs of the areas in question, a copy of my lease, a copy of the complex's rules and a copy of my country's rental act. Here is the best part though, remember that outgoing inspection? Legally, R would have then had to do an incoming inspection, which would have had to have been done by both of us and signed. According to the Rental Act, if you didn't do one, then you have zero claim on damages that a tenant does whatsoever. None. I could paint R is a moron in 4-foot-high letters on every wall in neon paint and he couldn't do a thing about it. Meanwhile, I put the garden onto an aggressive irrigation schedule. I told R that I could fix his lawn in a month. He didn't believe me. One of the things that he left out of my lease was charging me for water. We didn't use much, but in my last month of living there, that garden was watered religiously twice a day. I bought some compost and fertilizer, spread it around, and combined with the watering schedule, that lawn looked like something out of a golfing magazine. I sent photos of that as well to my lawyer. A few weeks later, my lawyer responded with an absolute curb stomping of a letter to him, referencing specific clauses in the Rental Act which he would be in violation of, as well as telling him that his lawn looks great and he should come take a look. The letter also stated that should he continue with this nonsense, then I was going to sue him for my full deposit as well as all legal costs involved. A few days later, he was at the house to do an outgoing inspection, lol, seriously, and couldn't believe how good the grass looked, and his water bill would only arrive a month after we left. He did not even mention the entrance hall, but still gave me a hassle about the driveway though. I told him that I would be seeing him in court, to which he replied, "But I'm an old man and I need to watch my blood pressure." My response was, "You picked a fight and now you're getting one." If blood pressure is a concern, then imagine where it will be when you're writing out a check for my full deposit plus both of our legal costs after I drag you through the courts as per my letter. "What letter?" he asked. Then the penny dropped. It turns out that Jay and he had an old feud running. They did not like each other very much, and she had informed him that the driveway looked like hell and needed to be repaved. As per rule of the complex, which I could now write an exam on, along with the Rental Act, the owner of the unit was liable. Funny thing is that rule itself is in contradiction of the Rental Act with regards to common ground. This is what R was paying monthly maintenance levies for. J was trying to save a buck, passed the problem on to R, who then passed it on to me. Now R wanted to sell his place and cash in on it, but the stingy old guy didn't want to put a hand in his own pocket, so he wanted some sap to pay for repainting the house, redoing the garden and repaving the driveway. Meanwhile, this lawyer who he had been seeing and who sent me the letter was just a general notary. The letter came from a Yahoo email address. He was taking a fat chance with me and was not expecting any resistance. My response came from one of the top litigation firms in this town, but for some reason his guy had not informed him of my response. I am guessing he noped the hell out of there as soon as he saw that I was ready to take it on. I left and said I would be back later to hand him his keys after taking my last load to our new place, and I'm guessing in that time he got a hold of the guy, because when I returned he was suddenly a lot friendlier and said,
"You know what, you have done such a good job on the garden that I've decided to drop the whole thing. Enjoy your new place."
Yeah, sure pal. For an added giggle the place sold while we were still moving out and I got to meet the new owners. When I asked them what day would be convenient for them for me to get a carpet cleaning service in, like I did every year, they told me not to bother as they would be doing an extensive upgrade before they moved in, which would involve ripping up all carpets, redoing the kitchen and bathrooms, and a total overhaul of the garden. Months later we checked the local property registry and saw that he sold the place for only a fraction more than what we offered, but through an agent, which would have ultimately resulted in him netting less than what we offered. That water bill must have been amazing though. Oh, and I got every cent plus interest of my deposit back within the legally stipulated time frame. In closing, learn the rental laws where you live, folks. It will not only make sure you are not screwed, but it will make you a better tenant too. Your country's rental act or whatever equivalent should be what you defer to, and no rules set inside a complex or block of apartments can supersede those. And guys, if you have watched until here and hate greedy or for landlords, then please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support my channel. Thank you so much in advance. And the next one is titled, "Neighbor posts pictures of my son all over town, so I help his tenants sue him." I've been enjoying this sub for a while, so I wanted to share this little story. I live in a small town next to a city that really has a little town feel to it, but not without it feeling like I'm living in the boonies. I moved in my house 15 years ago on a street that has maybe 5 houses on it. I get along with everybody near me to the point that we have a street party 3 times a year to get to know each other. The one no-show is always the guy that lives across from me. Let's call him passive-aggressive neighbor. He owns and lives in a duplex that is kind of tucked behind some trees and has a paved driveway that leads to it. But it is open enough that I can see his renter's side of the house. He is the one guy that has lived on this street longer than me. For the first 10 years I never saw the guy. He was a recluse and I recognized that. The first strange thing that happened was when I hired painters to paint my house. Even though I have ample parking, for some reason the painters wanted to park on his side of the street. The next day concrete blocks were lined up on the side of the street of his property, which was kind of ridiculous considering a car has never parked there in the 10 years I had lived there. Also, as I said, his house is down a long driveway, but whatever. Like I said, I have plenty of parking and at the time I thought it was funny. Now, my revenge story a year and a half ago, my wife received a letter with no return address and no name in the letter. What it was a passive-aggressive letter saying, "Hello, Fluffy Shark's wife here. You're a person that knows a lot of people around here. Can you please make sure these boys stay off of my property?" And in the letter were printed photos of 3 boys. One of them was our 7-year-old son. One of the other boys was my son's friend that lived next to this guy, and the boys were using his driveway to cut to his friend's house. Now I was thinking the guy could have had some balls and knocked on my door and talked to me, but it was a fair enough request. So the 3 boys and their parents had a meeting at my house where we told them under no reason are they to go on his property again. All the boys said, okay, no problem. It was during this time I found out that the father of my son's friend had an ongoing legal battle with the PA neighbor about the property line. 2 days later, I get a knock on my door and it was another neighbor that lived down the road, and he handed me a printed sign saying the following.
If these boys are seen on my property again, I will call the police.
And printed on it was the same 3 pictures of my son and his friends. The friendly neighbor then told me that this was posted on every power line and streetlight post in a 6-block radius. So the nice neighbor and I walked around and removed them all, but I was pissed. Who does that? So I took all the signs and the PA letter to the police station. The officer basically said, he is a bad neighbor, but he did nothing illegal. I again talked to my son and asked him if he has been on his property again, and he said, no way. I then showed him the letter and the signs and told him, this guy is pretty creepy, please stay away. So in the time from this incident to last summer, nothing has happened. But the father of my son's friend suddenly passed away. This forced my son's friend and his mom to move away. This summer, my son, now 9, was playing in front of my house when a young boy came from the renter's side of this house and said that him and his single dad just moved in. So of course they became good friends. I then told the boy's father the whole story about his landlord and my son, and in no way can he ever come to his house, but his son is welcome anytime in mine. About a month later, single dad comes to our house and shows me one of PA neighbor's famous letters about his lease. It's for only 2 parking spots and he is violating his lease. I guess his girlfriend had been parking on the driveway with plenty of space, I might add, at night mostly. Also, he was working on his motorcycle, which is also against his lease. Single dad had been living there for 1 month and was already getting evicted. So here was where I could get my petty revenge and told him to go ahead and use my land for his girlfriend to park for his booty calls and to work on his bike. A couple of days later I get a knock at my door and it is a man I've never seen before. It turns out to be PA neighbor and he wanted to discuss about his tenant's girlfriend parking in front of my house. I told him that I gave him/her permission to park there. He then started to argue with me and I said, hey look, I don't own the land in front of my house, the city does. What do you expect me to do? Put cement blocks in front of my house or take a picture of the girlfriend and post it everywhere? I then told him to F off and slammed the door in his face. The next week I get a text, single dad's girlfriend's car had been entered, she didn't lock it, and the glove compartment had been rifled through. An old phone was taken and another passive-aggressive unsigned letter saying not to park there. So, with no proof, the police could not do anything to his landlord and said it was a civil matter. Luckily, I had a camera set up on my house and I sent the video of PA neighbor going through her car and I emailed it to single dad with a statement of what PA neighbor has done to us in the past. Single dad moved out a week later but went ahead and sued his landlord. I just found out that with the help from me, single dad won his lawsuit and got $8,000 from my neighbor. And I gotta say guys, that is an absolutely amazing result for a revenge story. Please let us know in the comments what you thought about this story. And guys, unfortunately we have already reached the end of the video. However, this is not the end of ripe content for you. I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will hopefully soon show up on the left corner of the screen, which will provide you with hundreds if not thousands of hours of ripe content. If you still haven't gotten enough, then please also check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive Reddit videos that you will only find on there. Furthermore, if you want to share your own story with our community, then please head on over to r/ripestories on Reddit, where you can share your own stories and there is a good chance that I might read it in a video. Thank you so much for your daily support and I hope to see you again tomorrow.